All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Nexus Insights, where we are focused on having authentic conversations with interesting people. Today, we have Natalie Black from Worden Thane here to talk to us about all sorts of stuff. I'm sure we'll get into estate planning. I'm sure we'll talk about what people can be doing for prepping for their future, as Natalie's a partner at a law firm, one of the top law firms here in Missoula. We're really excited to have her. And so, Natalie, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
It should be fun. So, one of the things, as we were talking about, I like to kick these off just with a question, and because I think it allows us to get to know who people are and where they're coming from. And that question is, if somehow magically you could share one message to the whole world and they were going to hear what that message was on something that has positively impacted your life, what would that message be? What would you say there?
I thought about this because you told me we were going to ask me this question. And my message is that I've been living by for a couple of years now is work hard, play hard. And I say that because I do work really, really hard at my job, of keeping the life that I have with my husband and my dog, and the lifestyle that we live. And I work very hard, but I also play hard too, and make sure that I build in that work-life balance, but also the structure and the lifestyle that we want to live. And it didn't happen overnight. To get to the point where I'm at now. I'm still building towards the future that I want to have, and I have to work hard to do that. But also, you gotta play sometimes too, and make sure you build in the fun times, or else why are we doing what we're doing?
100%. Yeah. And it's because we have known each other for a couple of years. I mean, for a while, but I feel like our paths cross here and there, and just obviously kind of reconnecting after a mutual client. I was like, oh my gosh, it'd be really good to just circle back. But you've had a lot of changes from when I first met you, and same here. I mean, I feel like we've grown a ton, since when you first met me. Tell us a little bit about what you do. I mean, obviously you're a partner at Worden Thane here, which is super impressive. And and as we go into it, I know we talked a little bit about this, and I say this every podcast, but one of the main goals with this podcast was based on the idea of a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And the idea being that you are already at someone's 10X. There is someone out there who will look at the life you're living, will look at where you're working, look at what you're doing. Maybe they're in college studying to be an attorney right now. And maybe they're a brand new attorney. They're making no money. They just started. They're doing all the grunt work that no one wants to be doing. And they're thinking, man, if I could just end up in a position where I was working for a large law firm or being a partner at a large law firm,
even
that would be
finishing law school.
Even, yeah, exactly.
That's hard.
So the idea is that you're already at someone's 10X. And so, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, how you got there, and what led you to taking this path.
Yeah. So I am a partner at Worden Thane Law Firm here in Missoula. And I have been there since, this is my 10th year anniversary. So I've been there. I started as an intern in law school, and, just kind of worked my way up. It was the right fit at that time when they hired me as an intern, when I'm fighting with, or I guess not fighting, but competing with my classmates for that internship spot at that firm. And I remember thinking, there's no way they're going to pick me. There's a lot of other qualified people in my class, and it just ended up being the right fit, I think, on both sides. And so I've been working there ever since. I remember even leaving the interview and thinking, man, I would love to work there. They just seem like such good people. And they thought the same about me, which is, I'm so thankful for that every day, truly. And really just stayed there, knew that it was, even in my first summer, knew that that's the sort of people I wanted to work with. Our Worden Thane motto is that we want good people doing good work. We're not looking to be the Harvard Law School, graduates that are doing, the United States Supreme Court cases. We're not, these huge fancy lawyers. We want to just do good work for good people here in Montana. And whatever's going on to help people. It's ultimately all we want to do. So very happy work at that firm, and recently just became a partner this year. So that's just brand new in my life, and a huge achievement that I'm really proud of and very excited to continue working for this firm and working with my partners now, which is great, who were my mentors and now are my business partners, which is really cool. So yeah. And let's see, and how I got there, I'll back up and talk about, going to law school and what that was all like and kind of what led me to decide to go to law school, which I think is an interesting question that a lot of people always wonder about, why did you go to law school? And my story's unique, and I want anyone who's watching this to know that what I'm about to say is not going to be most people's stories, and I found that out really on day one of law school, and that's because I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, since I think middle school, I think it was around the time I was doing speech and debate, and I really enjoyed, like preparing an argument and presenting like a case and, and someone making a decision based on what I had to say. I really liked that. I found it really like stimulating and interesting to do, and the adrenaline rush that you get from that. And I also really liked Legally Blonde.
That's so funny. That is so fair.
We talked about that with Stephanie, remember? And she was like, I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And then you're like, oh yeah, what,
so
did you watch
funny.
Legally Blonde? And,
Literally.
yeah.
It looks so fun.
I would have been embarrassed to say that probably 10 years ago, but now I'm going, no, that was really one of the reasons why I wouldn't have probably put that connection together with doing like speech and debate in middle school, high school. And then it was watching Legally Blonde and going, oh, this is like a job I could do doing this. And this is something I think that could be really fulfilling. And that was like my favorite movie. So
it's funny you say that. And I definitely want to circle back, but things that are kind of, you look back like, oh, I was embarrassed to say that, but there's things that led me down the path of wanting to go into the Army. So like watching the movie Black Hawk Down, for example, that movie was like, made me be like, whoever these Ranger guys are, I want to be that. And then this is a really stupid thing that I've gone back and now I watch this movie after having been in the Army. I was like, what an idiot. But there was this movie that was called Battle Los Angeles, where essentially like all these aliens invaded America, and it was the Marines who were like fighting them and pushing them back. And now I've gone back and rewatched. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. But at the time, it's just like the thought of like being able to fight and being able to do stuff. So I think, movies, there's nothing wrong with a movie influencing people. Yeah. I think it just kind of gives us an idea of like what life could be like,
Well, and it's like, that's kind of what I was talking to somebody about it too. And it's like these little things, like silly little movies, which also I'm also part of, because I was like, oh, I know I want to do something in business. I don't know what that looks like yet. And so, but I just remember, I just want to be smart. I just want to feel the way that these like characters like have to feel in this moment, right? Yeah. And so, but I think it's a good thing, because like life is all aesthetics in the way that we think about it and the way that we view our own life. And it's like, of course you want to do something fun and something that makes you feel the same way that like specific movies do.
Still working on that being smart part.
Oh my God. Wish I was a lawyer now. I don't even know what to say to that.
I had to get her. The last time we were talking, the first thing you said to me was that I was an idiot. I mean,
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, one of the last conversations we have, and you know how many people I've had people at jiu-jitsu be like, "Hey, I guess you're an idiot now," and I'm like, they're like, "Oh," I was like, "What?" Of all the clips that we've posted, I literally had a buddy of mine who's a doctor who's like, well, I guess you're an idiot now. And I was
Wait, give context though, because there's contextual like.
Yeah, well, we were talking about a book called Surrounded by Idiots. And so like we were talking with a friend of ours, Stephanie.
And there's a quote that's like, if you don't feel like you're surrounded by idiots, then you are the idiot. If that makes sense. Because if like, you know what I mean? It's like surround yourself by people who are smarter than you.
Moral of the story was that in the first time Josie spoke on that episode, she's like, well, I guess you're an idiot, right? She just said something. I was like, well, thanks.
I go, so are you the idiot in the room?
Yeah. Anyway.
Because he goes, I feel like I'm smart. I feel like I know what I'm doing. And I go, so are you the idiot in the room? Yeah. And it was like,
I've just been waiting to get her back with anything. I was probably not as great as it could have been, but I was like, all right, so you want to be smart. Huh.
I don't talk a lot, but it's like.
Anyway, sorry.
It's memorable.
But so you were talking about your internship. You said that you felt like, and I know you said the word fight and then you backtracked, but like, what was that like? What is it like to become an intern? And
well, can we go back just slightly further? Because you also mentioned like competing with your classmates. And that to me stood out just because I know that there's a lot of people who are listening to this and they may not be in school. They could be working, they could be doing any of these other things, but maybe they're looking for like, what's that edge that's going to set me apart and get me that internship? What's the edge that's going to set me apart to get the partnership or anything like that? Because you're all doing the same coursework. So it's like, what do you feel like, what was like competing with your classmates like?
I really going to bring it back to my motto. I worked really hard to get into law school. I planned, you know, I had known I wanted to go to law school, which, like I said, most people didn't, you know. So I remember on my first day talking to people, and the classic question that you're always asking other law students is like, well, why did you decide to go? You know, why'd you come to Montana? You know, especially for people who are out of state, to go, why'd you come here? And they're going, oh, I don't know. I just graduated, you know, last year, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I'd go to law school. And that shocked me so much, because I went, oh, I'm sorry. You haven't spent your entire life leading up to this moment. And it kind of crushed me, because I realized that wasn't most people's, you know, life path to going to law school. And I think that's important to highlight, just because you don't have to, I don't want people listening to my story and go, you know, oh, well, I haven't been, you know, prepping to be a lawyer, you know, since I was in middle school, like Natalie was, because that's not the case. And my husband is actually an example of that he went to, he kind of watched me through my first year of law school and wasn't very happy with his career, and went, you know what, I think I want to do that. I want to be a lawyer. And he did all the things, passed the LSAT, did all the application materials, and ended up going, you know, 2 years after I did. And that was never going to be his life path that he ever expected that he would do. So it's very possible and very doable for people to go to law school. You just got to work hard. I'm not sure I even answered your question, but back to, so about, you know, what it's like, you know, kind of how do you set yourself apart then once you're in law school and you're looking for, you know, like that internship. Unfortunately, there is a big emphasis on grades. And the first law firm that I interviewed with for that internship, they made it honestly pretty clear that they cared about what my GPA was, and even made a comment of, well, your GPA is high enough. I can tell you're near the top of your class, so we will consider you. And that felt. It didn't feel great. And going, okay, they didn't really seem to care about, you know, what, you know, who I was or anything really about me. It was about what was my grades on a piece of paper. And so I kind of knew that probably wasn't the right fit for me, because I wanted to build a career somewhere. And I went, I don't want to personally work with people who care more about grades than the person, you know, behind the piece of paper. I remember during my interview with Worden Thane, and I knew, because all of us were, you know, my class, which had we had a smaller class. I think we had about like between 70 to 80 students. Most classes have like around 100 at the UM Law School here. And so probably more than half that class, it was, you know, applying for these same internships. And so I knew that the first question they were going to ask was, they were just going to say, so tell me about yourself. And so I was prepared with an answer for that. So I think, honestly, one thing I would suggest is preparing for your interviews. Kind of, you know, if you know there's, in the law school setting, there's going to be your classmates that are applying for the same job, find out what questions they're asking and be prepared with answers for that. But I also went into it pretty relaxed and going, you know what, I probably have a snowball's chance in getting this job. So I was pretty relaxed. I was myself, and went, I'm going to go into these interviews being myself and just try and do my best to just, you know, convey who I am and see if that's something that fits with this law firm. So
one of the questions I was thinking too, as you've been talking, is that, because you said that with Worden Thane, and I'm probably going to, I'm paraphrasing, but you said, you know, good people doing good work, I think it was something to that tune.
Yep.
And then you also said, like, you know, we're trying to be like normal people helping, you know, Montanans. And it's funny you say that, because I feel like Worden Thane is like, you know, when people talk about law firms in Missoula, and granted, Missoula's a small town, but it's definitely like one of the top law firms, you know, it's very much like, oh, that's Worden Thane. So like, but you made the comment of like, oh, we're not like trying to be like the Harvard graduates who are fighting Supreme Court cases or something. And so like, I guess, you know, I look at even in the financial advising world, it's not the same story. There's differences. Like you could do what we do, which I feel like is very much like I think we work primarily with Main Street America. Now, Main Street America doesn't mean they don't have any money. I have a lot of Main Street clients who come into money, whether that's through inheritances, through people going, their companies going public, through whatever the case may be, and they come into some serious money. But like a lot of the people that I see who have a lot of money, they grew up very normal lives. They didn't grow up like, with a silver spoon. And so like in the financial advising world, that's one route you can go. And then there's the other people who want to like live in New York and who want to like, be the main stock trader, a broker there. And they want to live that like fast lifestyle. And, they only want to work with people like, they go to the Golden Sachs of the world and they're like, oh, we have a $10 million minimum. And like, it's trying to be sleek and sexy. And to me, I always think like that, to me, that seems dumb. Like, I'm like, you guys are idiots because the big market is the middle market. It's not like, if you were to look at Nordstrom's versus Target, for example, all right, an example I'll give to people sometimes is that if I bought this exact outfit at Nordstrom's, this one shirt would probably cost me, $200. It's a plain white shirt, all right? And I bought it on Amazon for like $30, right? But if I went to Target, I could buy the same shirt for about $30, $35, right? But if you look at who makes more money selling shirts, is it Nordstrom's or is it Target? Well, it's Target because they cater to the middle market. It's such a bigger market that through volume, they make so much more money, and I think that's kind of the model I've taken where, I've always been like, I don't want to exclude the middle market. I don't want to exclude people because of minimums or anything like that. And so our world, that's kind of what it looks like between differences in advisors. What is it like in the legal world? Like what is when someone who's like I want to go to the Harvards or the Yales, and I like, what is the career path that those guys are trying to do typically, and how does it differ from like what you see yourself doing and how that's worked for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in bigger cities, I would say, and bigger and like much larger law firms and in different states, I think what I call big law, which I think is kind of a term used like nationally for like big law firms that where they're doing the really bigger things like mergers and acquisitions, which we do here in Montana, just on a smaller scale. But these really big, either like litigation or big corporate practices where the lifestyle is just very, very different than how it is, at my firm and probably most firms in Montana, where you're going to prestigious Ivy League law schools, and then you get hired at these big law firms where you're expected, as an associate to bill, I don't know, like really crazy billable hours every year. And it's all about the billable hour at these bigger firms. You make a lot of money, you make good money doing that, but you're working. There's, kind of back to my whole work hard, play hard. There is no playing hard. You're just working hard all the time. There's no work-life balance. And I have had, a very good friend of mine who moved from, two good friends of mine that moved from big law practices on the East Coast that came to Montana just right before the pandemic, looking for that work-life balance. And so I've heard from them, the work life, that they have or had during that period of time and how hard they work. And, so that's what's just different about, at least from my firm. And I would say probably fair for most firms in Montana, where we're not killing ourselves to get those billable hours. It's not, the main focus. Obviously we got to work hard to make a living and get all of our work done, help our clients, but we're not focusing on, oh, you got to bill, 3,000 hours this year or else you're going to get fired, something crazy like that. So, yeah.
Is that also noticed in the difference between when the law school you go to? So like if you go like to the U of M here and the law school here versus if you go to an Ivy League school, what does that look like? Because again, from an outsider looking in, we don't know. Like everyone, when they think of attorneys, they see like Law and Order, they see Suits, like so Suits. Yeah. It's always funny. My wife and I, we've watched that show all the way through, and it's like, what a horrible way to live. Like these guys are at the office at 10 and 11 o'clock, and then and then towards the end of the show, you're like, you guys are actually the bad guys here. Like, do you not realize like you're doing the wrong stuff? And so like, I just look at that stuff like, who would want to live like this? Like, I'd rather go out in the mountains and take my son, hiking and camping. But like, what is it like for school when people do go to like the Ivy League law schools? Like, is it is it a completely different, like what's expected? Or is it just like, because I've heard people talk in the past, it's like, hey, some of those Ivy League schools, especially undergrad, is not as good because you're being taught by like, grad students versus you go to some of these other colleges where it's like, no, you're actually getting taught by these professors with, decades of experience. So like, again, going back to my question there, like what is the difference between someone at like a school like the U of M versus if they wanted to go to an Ivy League school?
Yeah. I don't really know what the experience would be like at these other Ivy League schools since I didn't go to one. But I imagine there is kind of like a set curriculum set by the American Bar Association, I think, where you have to pass the bar exam. So that's, for most states, it's on a uniform bar exam. Not every state's on it. But so there is kind of like a curriculum that I think most lawyers or most law students have to learn and take. So it's probably similar curriculum across whatever school you go to. But I think what's the important thing is thinking about, and what was important to me was, where do I want to practice? And I'm a Montana kid. I was born and raised here. I knew I wanted to stay here. So it was kind of a no-brainer. I went, well, obviously I'm going to go to the law school here. There's no point in going to law school somewhere else. So I'd go to Washington, or go to Gonzaga is a school that I kind of looked at that's got a law school. Another one I hear a lot about is Lewis and Clark. I think that's in Oregon, and but I don't plan on practicing in Oregon or Washington. So why would I go to a school in that state, learn those states' laws that I'm never going to practice in? So I just wasn't interested in that. But I think that is for anyone who's listening to this that wants to go to law school, is think about where you want to end up at. I wouldn't say it's the most important reason of what school you pick, but consider, it's definitely a consideration of where you want to put down your roots and what laws you're going to learn, because your professors are going to be practitioners in that state. And that's the laws they're going to know. A lot of your curriculum will be heavily weighted into whatever state that you're at the law school you're at. So
how did you choose the area of practice that you wanted to focus on?
Oh, good question. So right before I went to law school, my grandma passed away. And she had a stroke. It was unexpected. We didn't prepare for that. My grandma and I also went straight from undergrad right into law school. So I didn't have a break in between. So I had just graduated. My grandma saw me graduate from college, and I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. So I was the first generation. It was a really, really big deal. And then she had a stroke, and she ended up passing over that summer in between. And didn't have any estate planning in place, and lots of questions were being asked of me that I couldn't answer, and people kept looking at me and going, well, she's the one going to law school, she's going to know the answers, and I didn't. So I just really became drawn to that, to go, I know I could help people immediately by knowing some of these answers and learning that. So really that's how I got into estate planning, and really just by my own personal experience and making sure that, I could help people in my family and make sure that they felt that they were prepared and and having their affairs in order. So it's interesting because, again, we were talking earlier about one of the other guests we had. Her name's Stephanie Sylvan, and she runs a business here in Missoula called Caring Transitions, which helps. Oh yeah. I don't know if you know her. Yeah, I think I might have met her, but we do work with Stephanie and Caring Transitions.
Yeah,
quite
she's
a bit.
mentioned your guys' firm to us as well, and but her story was, it's just interesting how life events, again, push people towards different things. But her grandfather, towards the end of his life, also he had dementia, and he got violent towards the end of his life. Mm-hmm. And she said, there's just no one to help us. There was no one to help us transition him into a spot, and no one really knew the answers. And she's like, I had to start figuring these out. And that's exactly kind of very, very similar. She's like, I just realized I could help people avoid this, Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like you've kind of mentioned like a little bit about your family life, being born and raised here in Montana. So are you from Missoula, or where are you from?
No, I'm from Great Falls.
Okay.
Yep. Born and raised there, and came over here for school, and just been here ever since.
Yeah. I mean, what was, young Natalie like? What were you doing when you grew up? Were you like just super in school? Were you in sports? What did you like to do?
Yeah, let's see. So I I was like the band nerd for
Nice.
sure. Yeah, in high school. And I did track, or did field events, and did that for a couple of years. But and did like speech and debate and like those business programs. What's it called? DECA. Did that. And it's actually funny. My husband always makes fun of me because I was like the band nerd, and we went to high school together. We're not high school sweethearts, but he was, and we didn't like each other because he was like the Mr. Personality, you know, the jock, like football team, and you know, and he played guitar. You know, everyone thought he was so cool, and then he would make fun of me for being like the band nerd.
What a dick.
Oh, he totally was.
What's your husband's name?
Brandon.
Brandon, come on, man. I can't give you a hard time.
Oh, it's no, do it. That's definitely part of our story for sure. You know, we always talk about that. So, and actually going to the military, I think, is really what humbled him and made him like the person he is today. So when he joined the Army, so he's a good man now.
Good. Yeah, it's. I remember getting called out. I'm not going to say her name because the internet's nothing. It all lives forever. But there was a girl in 6th grade that I liked. All right, and she had really big teeth. Right, like really big teeth. But I thought she was cute. You know, I was a 6th grader, and so I would run up to her and I would go, "Hey," and I'd say her name. I go, you know, like that. And I was just such an ass about it. Right, and then I ran into her. When I was like finishing high school up, and like she was just smoking hot, right? Like she just turned out great. And she walked up to me and in front of all my friends, just like started tearing into me. It's like, I bet you wish you hadn't made fun of me now. Huh? And I'm in front of my friends, and I just remember being like, I had a huge crush on you. I'm sorry. And she's like, you did? I was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. She's like, it's okay. And then she was totally cool about it, but I was like, I wish I hadn't made fun of that girl, you know? Yeah. But I just felt like a jerk, you know? I've had a few of those in my life, but
so we've all done it.
Yeah.
We've all done it.
Yeah. So with your family then, they're still here in Montana, I'm assuming. Are you pretty close with them, or?
Yeah, so all of my family's in Great Falls except for me, and same with my husband. So all of our family's in Great Falls, which makes holidays really easy because we just always go to Great Falls. So and it's not too far, and it's hard when we go there, you know, because there's it's hard to split our time between our families and our friends, and so we love it when people come up and see us. We get more quality time, which is really important to us. It's just, you know, like I said, I feel like maybe I'm going to be a broken record, but the work hard, play hard, you know, like that's part of my playing hard is that quality time with our family. And so when they're up here, I'm not working. My mom and dad are here, and I'm going to, you know, spend this good time with them and have like that good quality time.
So when because kind of going back to what you were talking about with, you know, what you learned from your grandma, because I have those conversations, I feel like all the time with people about their estate planning, and I think it's a lot more than even just like what happens when you die. Like, I think it's like, even if just having like your powers of attorney in place, like to make sure, because I have a friend who was in a car accident, her husband was killed, and she was here in Montana. And then, you know, her family had to fly up here and like basically go through the emergency proceedings of getting everything done. And they spent a fortune to try and get all the documents in place so they could talk to doctors and everything. And it seemed like it cost, you know, substantially more. And so would you like, just for our viewers who maybe aren't exactly sure what like basic estate planning looks like, and, you know, really what people should be focused on having, and kind of like what happens if they don't, and not necessarily just their wills, but like if they don't have the right powers of attorney and they get in an accident and then families are trying to deal with that, like, could you just kind of walk through that?
Yep. So when you say the word estate planning, what that means is a couple of different things. The one that most people think of is your will. So that last will and testament. What do you want to happen with all of your stuff when you're no longer with us? Sometimes that could include a trust. If you decide, you know, that we also need a trust agreement, you got some continuing, generally you're doing a trust if you have some continuing terms that you need to happen after you pass away. And so continuing trust terms, like you've got a child that's under the age of 18 and you want to make sure that, you know, someone's handling it for them until they're a certain age. That might be a reason why you do a trust. Powers of attorney, which are documents where you designate someone as your agent while you're alive, and they actually become they become ineffective when you pass away. So this is only while you're alive, and you need someone to be able to make decisions for you. And then another final thing we usually do as well is a living will declaration. So just making sure that you have your wishes for your end of life care, and who you maybe want to be, making that decision in consultation with your doctors. So that's like the basic estate planning documents that I'm typically looking at and preparing for people. I will say that probably if you're going, I don't know if I can afford to do all of that, I go do powers of attorney, because they're a little bit easier in the sense of the decision you have to make, and it's just so important for that exact reason you were talking about, Robert, is with the situation you mentioned, is that's the sort of like horrific thing that could happen. Someone's in a car accident, they're in the hospital in a coma or whatever, having a surgery, and there's nobody there, that is designated to make decisions for you. And as much as you'd think it's like, oh, well, I'm married, my spouse can just talk to the doctor, but that's not the case. Those doctors can't, because you're an adult, and you are entitled to make your own decisions. And if you can't do it for you, if you don't have a power of attorney that is named, that says I am this person's agent in a writing, then you might have to go to court, and someone gets appointed as a guardian and conservator, which is probably what happened with your friend's situation, unfortunately, which is it's a really terrible process. I do them all the time, but we try to avoid it as much as possible. But really that's where you have to go to a court and declare the person as being incapacitated, that they cannot make decisions for themselves. And someone is designated as their guardian and conservator, and it's all going through court proceedings. You have to be, interviewed by, a social worker. There's multiple attorneys involved. Everyone has their own counsel, making sure that the person who is under the guardianship is who we call the protected person, making sure that there's someone advocating for them, and really it's a very in-depth proceeding, and you can kind of see that how it got played out in the media with Britney Spears and her conservatorship. So you are taking away someone's rights and liberties to be able to make decisions for themselves. So we need a lot of court intervention to make sure that that this is the right thing for this person.
And with the cost of this, because what I've been, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's substantially more expensive to do that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because to get basic estate planning documents, you might be looking at $1,500 to $2,000, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But to do it in the middle of a crisis, not only are you dealing with so I don't really go into this story much, but the girl I'm talking about, the way I met her was I was the first responder to her car accident.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was still in the Army, and I was driving back and forth to drop kids off to MEPS, which is in Butte. And so I would have to when I was in the Ranger Regiment, they sent me back on temporary orders to be a recruiter here for about 60 days. I was trying to figure out some stuff, trying to get closer to home. It was a weird thing, but they're like, hey, we'll let you go do that. Try and get guys to come to the Ranger Regiment, right? I was like, okay, cool. And so I was a lower enlisted guy. So my job was to drive back and forth to Butte, and there'd be weeks where I would make that drive Monday through Friday, just to take kid to MEPS. And I was coming back, and as you guys know, there's those rolling hills that as this girl and her husband, they were going over one of the hills, an elderly lady had got on the freeway driving the wrong way, and they hit them head on. And again, just you think about how close you are to just death sometimes and things changing. I remember watching their car going up and seeing them slam on the brake lights, seeing the brake lights as they were cresting the hill. And I was like, that was weird. So I moved over, and as soon as I came up, head on car accident.
Oh, that's
and
horrible.
So, yeah, it was really just this crazy thing where, and then I went up to the car. The husband was dead. Unfortunately, he didn't make it. And the young woman, I'm not going to say her name just because, again, the internet's too easy to find people. But she basically, their car had flipped and she was pinned. And it was so weird because her husband was literally just hanging, he's dead right here. And I'm trying to cover him up so she can't see him. But then I ended up doing all of her. The car started on fire, and so thankfully I had a fire extinguisher, so I was able to put the car out. I was doing all this stuff, and then I ended up doing all her first responder stuff. So basically we got her out of the car. We got when the paramedics showed up, we'd already stabilized her. I helped with her IV. I helped her get life flighted. And then I got to know her family after this because of all this stuff that had happened. And so I just remember them talking about like how like much like of a struggle it was because they were dealing with all this stuff, and they were here on vacation. They didn't even live here in Montana. They were just on a road trip.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. And so again, I just remember them like being stressed out, and she was in the ICU for like a week, and then being like, yeah, we're having to go through all this process to be able to like talk to doctors. It's been so stressful. And I was like, oh my gosh. And that was like my first experience to this, you know? And so what does that cost look like for people? Like and I guess like you just kind of explained the process, but like on top of the stress, like emotionally, it's financially a lot more expensive, correct?
Oh yeah. Yep. So yeah, like you were saying, like basic estate planning, which is hard to like quote because I mean everybody's situation's different, but like generally most people it's around like 2,000 to 3,000, maybe less, maybe more, just depending on what you got going on. And if you're just doing a power of attorney, those are maybe a couple $100. You know, like if someone were to come and go like, I really just need a power of attorney, great. That's not going to be very expensive. We've got great forms. You know, I'm not reinventing the wheel. And there's also you can find forms online as well, which I can talk more about. But let's see. But if you don't have that power of attorney and you need a guardianship, you know, for a loved one, I mean, that could run over like $10,000 very, very easily. And I would say probably minimum all in on all the couple of attorneys you have to have, doctor visits and social worker visits. It all just adds up. And there's court, you know, there's hearings and it's time consuming as well. So. Yeah.
And also, like, with that, I feel like a lot of people don't necessarily know what all of their options are and maybe don't know what a holographic will is. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of explain that a little bit too.
Yeah. Good question. So holographic will, which is valid in Montana, which is where you, as we call the testator, are writing in your own handwriting, and it has to be in handwriting, saying what your terms are. So saying if you're saying I want to leave everything to my 2 kids, you know, Joe and Jill, and I want Jill to be the personal representative, and then it's signed and dated in their own handwriting, then that's a valid will in Montana. And so I have, you know, had where a loved one dies, and their family comes in and that's what they have, and we probate those. Sometimes it doesn't quite meet the standard in Montana, and so then we're looking at then maybe the will is not valid. And in Montana, you know, there's statutes that say if you don't have a will, we're going to create one for you and tell you who your heirs are under Montana law. So just because you don't have a will doesn't mean that, you know, your stuff's going to the state or you know, to someone. It's going to go to your family, you know, according to statute. So it's generally, you know, your spouse, your kids, maybe your parents if you don't have, you know, surviving spouse and surviving kids, and kind of going up a generation from there. If you don't have surviving parents, then it goes up to parents and then down to siblings anyway. So it's all laid out for you.
And can you do something like that with a power of attorney?
Well, good question. I don't know. I don't know if it would be valid in the same way as like a holographic will, which by statute, there's a statute that says, you know, this is permitted. But I think I have seen a handwritten power of attorney, which I did honor, that was in handwriting, that said, you know, I'm designating this person as my power of attorney to do, you know, XYZ, do these certain things. And it was signed and notarized. So yeah, I think to answer your question, yes, you can. Yeah. The one thing that's tricky about powers of attorney is that is thinking ahead of what those third parties are going to want to see in those documents, which oftentimes I find the industries that usually have more specifics are banking, where they want some very specific information in that power of attorney, but then also title companies for real estate, and so they're looking for very specific things that are permitted in that power of attorney. And if it just says, you know, oh, my agent can do any and all things that I can do, that might not work. You know, if they were to bring that into the bank, or even to you, Robert and Josie, and go, you know, oh, I've got this power of attorney for your client. Can I talk to you about this? And you're going, well, you know, and if you have any concerns, you might look at it and go, well, this doesn't have specifically, you know, for brokerage accounts or for retirement accounts or, you know, for banking powers, and then it might not be effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I'm glad you asked that, Josie, because like, I know I've had people in the past where I've let them know like, hey, this is an option. I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving legal advice. However, look into this as an option to do, a holographic will, because I'd rather see, and that's one of the conversations I have with clients all the time is like, please get this done, because I've been through enough things with clients where I've seen people who do it right and then they pass away. And I've seen people who are inheriting assets that are contested and that it's not an easy process. I had a client who, and I'm going to give as little specifics as possible, but she had her father pass away in another state, and he had basically started dating a new girl, and kind of towards the end of his life wasn't making the greatest of decisions, and ended up basically like setting up this new girlfriend of his to receive a pretty sizable chunk of his assets. And he didn't do anything through estate planning. He just had beneficiary designations, but then he also left a note that said everything was supposed to go to his daughter. So the contested was the beneficiary said one thing, which the beneficiary is going to supersede. And she was like, but I have this. This says it's mine. And it was like a couple $100,000. And again, it's just a sticky situation because of lack of planning. And so that's what I try and really encourage our clients to understand is like your beneficiary designations are super important that you have them right. I have another client who his mom passed away, and she had a pension that he ended up inheriting, but she also had some life insurance that she had forgotten to change the beneficiary on. And so his dad was still listed as the beneficiary, and they, like, all of them had a falling out. Like, he didn't like his dad, his mom hated him, but he ended up getting, again, a couple $100,000. And another thing I'll talk to people about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that I have some clients who come in and say, oh, I'm just going to leave all this to my oldest son or whatever, and then he can figure it out. I'm like, please don't do that. Please, for the love of God, don't do that.
These are all my worst nightmares.
Yes, I know. They're my worst nightmares too, because I have to talk to people about this. And I'm like...
Well, and when people die, like, especially parents, the last thing they want is for all of their kids to start fighting instead of being focused on the fact that they're supposed to be mourning and they're dealing with all this other kind of stuff. And families literally break up all the time because of this.
And money is, like, when someone inherits assets as a beneficiary, I just went through this with a person who was trying to leave the assets to his son. He's like, yeah, then he can figure it out. I was like, please don't do this, because if you do this, your son has no legal obligation to give this money to anyone. And it also can create some issues with gifting, because you can only gift so much per year before you have to pay taxes on this. And so I was just letting him know, like, just list it who you want, and that way it goes there, and then there's no issues, there's no questions about what you were trying to do, because I have dealt with it's multiple a year where people come into money and they think like, oh, this is all going to be, easy. And it is when they do it right. When beneficiary designations are done right, then it only takes maybe a month to transfer money. Like, we get some death certificates, we open up a new account, we move the money, like, easy peasy. But like, when it's not done right, it creates such crazy headaches. And I have seen just like huge family blowouts. That lady I was bringing up earlier, where her father passed away, she spent 2.5 years trying to get that money and didn't. And so it's like, spent all this time, all this effort, exactly what you're saying, Josie, is that, like, instead of focusing on like, hey, I lost my father, it's like stressed out, spending hours and hours and hours on the phone, tons of legal fees just to not get the money. And I was like, and I told her, I was like, you're probably not going to get this money. And again, I'm not an attorney, but I know how beneficiary designations work, and they supersede they supersede a will. And so she just, anyways, yeah, I know you were writing if you had something you wanted to go over there.
There's a couple of things that you said in there that I went, okay, I want to make sure I hit on. But start with these beneficiary designations. You're absolutely right. That those, if you have a written will that says everything goes to my kids, and you list those kids out, but you've got a beneficiary designation that's got someone entirely different than your kids, that account's going to that person and not to your kids, how you have it in your will. And that's just because because it supersedes, those beneficiary designations supersede what's in your will. And that's because you signed a contract. When you put those beneficiary designations on your accounts, you're effectively signing a contract with that financial institution that they are going to transfer those funds to those individuals that you have listed as beneficiaries, and they now have an obligation to do that. And they're not going to follow what's in your will. It's going to go according to that beneficiary designation. So it's a really important estate planning tool that is really great because you can avoid probate. You don't need a trust, if you have beneficiary designations sometimes, but it's definitely a part of the conversations with clients of how are we utilizing these beneficiary designations and making sure that they are up to date and making sure that you get confirmation from the financial institutions of what it says so that you have the written records. Because that's something that comes up, every once in a while where we end up having to do a probate because someone says, they tell me, oh, yep, definitely a beneficiary's on that. They die and we find out that they don't, and we have to open up a probate. And we're going, oh, we did all this work and it's all for naught. Now we have to go through this probate process, which is something else we should talk about in here. I'm going to write that on the list.
It's funny. I'm writing down a lot of the same things I think you are because I have a client who we started working with, the gentleman I referred you to recently who came in his situation where, the beneficiary designations weren't updated. And so he ended up, I think it was something like $3.6 million that, was left to him. But because it took him so much longer to get that because he knew, and he was one of the rare ones who was like, I'm going to do the right thing.
Yes.
He's like, I know my dad wanted this money to be split amongst these family members. And he basically is like, I know I'm only supposed to get half of this. And when I was talking to him, I was like, hey man, you can do whatever you want to do. I think that's very honorable, but legally you don't have to do this. And he could have walked away with the full 3.6 or whatever it was and called it a day, but he went through the entire proceedings, had to get attorneys involved just so that he could gift away that money because, again, beneficiary designations weren't updated. And so it's just so important. But why don't we go into probate and maybe explain what that process is, how it works. And then maybe as we get towards the back end of that, I'd love to hop into trusts and when you see people need them and maybe some of the basic types. But that's a big one. So let's just start with probate.
Yep. So probate is the process where when after you pass away, and if there are assets in your probate estate, which I'll explain. But if you have assets in your probate estate, someone has to be appointed as a personal representative, or sometimes we call it an executor, and they are appointed by the court. So it's typically, most times we can do this informally, either with a will or without a will. So we talked about, if you have a will, we call it a testate proceeding versus an intestate proceeding, which is when you don't have a will. And so that person gets appointed by the court. We do it informally, so you usually don't have to go in front of a judge. Actually, the clerk signs the paperwork and says, yep, this is a valid will. And, we're relying on the statements and the declarations made in an application for probate from the personal representative. And they allow that person to serve as the PR, and they get these letters, testamentary. So the letters are kind of like their ticket to be able to act as the personal representative for the estate. And we go through this probate process. Now, oftentimes, I would say probably most estate planning I'm doing, we're trying to avoid this probate process because it's time consuming and it's much more expensive generally than if we can try to avoid it. And through non-probate mechanisms, which are beneficiary designations, is a big one, or trusts are really those two big ones. The other things are joint assets. So if you are married and you own your house with your spouse as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, that also acts as a non-probate transfer because it just passes automatically to the survivor. So typically that's why for most spouses, we don't have to do a probate when one of them dies because most of your stuff is set up as joint with your spouse. But so that probate process, it'll take over a year just because you got to wait on, creditor claims. You got to publish notice. You got to file taxes and stuff. So it's about a year-long process. It's going to cost you, kind of back to what I said, most estate planning average $2,000 two or so, versus like an estate minimum, probably 5,000 minimum. And that just depends on what
When you
assets
say
we have to
an
probate.
estate, so say one more time, $2,000 versus 5,000.
Yeah, 5,000, sorry, to like do a probate. Okay. So I kind of, when I'm talking to people about estate planning and I'm not trying to pitch anything, I'm just, this is just what I see on a day-to-day basis. So someone pays me to do their estate planning, it's going to cost them on average maybe around like 2,000. Again, that just totally varies. So I don't want anyone to get stuck on that number.
You said $2,000. I saw it. Yeah.
Don't get stuck on that number because it totally depends. Everybody's situation is very, very different. That's probably just truly like an average I would see over the range of people where I have like really, really complicated stuff, which complicated doesn't mean lots of money. Not always, complicated means you have some complicated family situations, or maybe you do have some money and we're doing some estate tax planning. And so anyway, so that's about average for to actually do estate planning, where 9 times out of 10 we are avoiding the probate process. If you don't have if someone dies without a will, and the biggest thing of reason why we have to do probates is because they have real estate and there's no way to transfer that. You can do transfer on death deeds in Montana now, where you can record a deed that says when I die, this property passes to these beneficiaries, which is a great tool. And that avoids a probate. But if you don't have that, you don't have a trust saying, that holds this property, then you're looking at a probate for your real estate. And that's probably the biggest reason why people who don't do estate planning, we end up having to do probates is for real estate. So
with what you're saying there, because and I'll use myself as an example. I've talked with, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I've talked with multiple attorneys who have said that typically when they recommend that people have trusts will be if they have property outside the state of Montana, or if they have multiple LLCs.
Yeah.
Is there, using me as an example, I don't have a trust. I have my will, my living wills, I have my powers of attorney, I have all that stuff. So what would be the benefit for someone like me then, where I have one LLC, I have my primary residence here in the state of Montana, and especially I didn't know about this transfer on death deed, but what would be, for someone like me, if heaven forbid, my wife and I both died today, what would the process look like for, and everything has clear beneficiary designations, what could my family expect then? And what would that process look like in the state of Montana, and the costs associated, because I don't have a trust and we would have some things that have to go through probate?
Yep. So if something happened to both of you, unfortunately, it would, you're truly because of your real estate, 'cause you don't have, a transfer on death deed on your house right now, or a trust, or some other mechanism that would transfer that house to somebody else, would probably require a probate. And you also have minor kids, right? Which is another consideration and another huge piece of estate planning we haven't talked about, is planning for, who's going to take care of your kids if something happens to you, which honestly is, besides powers of attorney, is my second thing that I'm always telling people. If you've got minor kids, you should be putting in writing who you want to be the guardian and conservator for your minor kids. Because if something were to happen to you and your spouse, which is the most morbid, horrific thing that we talk about. But if that happens, on top of a probate, we're also looking at a guardianship action for your minor kids. So you have 2 court actions going on. You've got a probate and you've got a guardianship action of who is going to be, appointed as a guardian, which you in your will get to tell the court, this is who I wish to be, that guardian conservator that takes priority over the statutes that then give a list of priority of who can serve, or who has the priority to serve in that role. Let's see. So make sure I'm answering your question. So that's what you would be looking at, is a probate and also guardianship action, and also because that guardianship / conservatorship, which I'll talk about for a second. A guardianship is an action for your person, and then conservatorship is for your estate. So for guardianship is being able to make decisions for your health care, but then also for a minor child. Where's is that child going to live? Who's raising them? And that's the guardian.
Can you explain kind of more what that process looks like too?
Yes. Yep. And so it's very similar to what I was describing earlier. You know, when we were talking about where it was an adult that needed a guardianship, there's, you can do the exact same proceeding for a minor. It's just obviously a little bit different because you're making different decisions for a minor versus for an adult. So with a minor, you are looking for the guardianship person. That would be the person who's making decisions over where is that child going to live, where are they going to school, where are they, what healthcare, decisions do they need help making while they're under the age of 18. And then the conservatorship piece is managing their money, which oftentimes, before I say that, so with a conservatorship, it's managing money and like legal affairs. So, if in the situation we're talking about where Robert and his wife dies, his kids are now under like a guardianship and conservatorship, the money that they are inheriting from their parents will be in this conservatorship managed by this conservator until their age 18. And what I was about to say is one tool that we use for parents, that have these minor kids is looking at, okay, with a guardianship and conservatorship, they're generally going to get those kids are going to get their money when they turn 18. There's the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, which Montana has adopted, that says that, minors don't get their money until they're age 21. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking at there. But say you're going, I don't want my kids to have all that money when they turn 18. So we're oftentimes doing trusts for minor kids, and your estate planning when you have minor kids to go, okay, I wanted to stay in trust until they're 25. I want to make sure that they have money to go to school and they don't blow it on a car, or something. So that's one really big consideration, kind of tying it back to your other question of like, what are the reasons why people need a trust? And that might be one of them, is looking at if you're in your stage of life where you have minor kids is, do you need what we call a children's trust, which, where we hold the money in a trust until the child reaches a certain age. So if something happens to both parents, then you've got a guardianship and conservatorship for who's going to take care of those kids, but then also a trustee who's going to manage those funds for them.
Well, and I'm just curious, and this is a question for Robert as well, when it comes to like the UTMA accounts, and then even with like Coverdell education savings accounts, all that kind of stuff is depending on what the parent wants those accounts to be used for, but a lot of them can be outdated or have penalties and stuff like that. And so maybe when somebody is looking into that, what are the common like pitfalls that parents fall into when they're setting up those accounts?
Oh, yeah, good question. So one thing I see oftentimes are, 529s that you guys probably set up as well for people all the time, which are 529s are education accounts where you can put money into them, where parents or other family members can do that usually for minor kids. And it's strictly for education purposes. And if you use the money outside of education purposes, you can get penalized on it. But it's a great tool, just to prepare for like education. And I do have a lot of people use it, and some people that go, I don't want to tie my kids' hands to like going to school. Mm-hmm. So maybe they might not want to use those. UTMA accounts, so the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act accounts really don't have much restrictions other than once the child turns 21, it's theirs. There's no restrictions on education or any purpose. It just, they turn age 21, they can call the financial institution and get all that money out. So it really just depends on what the parents are wanting to do to set up for their kids. If they're going, I don't care what you do with it, and I just want you to, not be able to, remove all of it and spend it all by age 21. Is it
in their name though? Is the UTMA in their name?
Yes, it is. Yep.
So does that hit their books is for tax reasons and for when they maybe are applying to college? Is it going to be somewhat detrimental to them when they're applying for things like
I know the answer to that.
I was going to say please, because I can't remember off the top of my head.
It 100% does count towards their assets.
Which I thought so. I just maybe somebody else explain it a little bit better.
So when people are going in and they're applying for financial aid, it's like a two-tiered process where they're going to look at what are the assets held in the applicant's name, and they look at a certain percentage. I used to know off the top of my head, but let's just say it's around like 32%, right? And then they remove one step away in what's in their parents' assets. So when you have...
I think the first amount is taxed at the child's tax bracket.
So with the UTMA, the first $1,300 in profits you make per year are tax-free. The second $1,300 you make are taxed tax at the child's tax rate, which for most kids, they're in a 0% capital gains tax bracket because they have no income. So it's essentially like $2,600 per year that you can make tax-free. You know, consult your tax professional, I have to say that, right? All right.
Yep.
But for all intents and purposes, and a UTMA is very similar to what Natalie was saying, and I have a question on for this for you too, Natalie, is that, but with a UTMA, yeah, it can be used for anything. So like my daughter, she has a UTMA, my son, we have a UTMA. For all the reasons you said, we're not like married to the idea of them having to go to college. Now, there are some nice things with 529s where if someone ends up getting a scholarship, then they can pull the money out tax-free. If they go to the military and their school is paid for, they can pull that money out tax-free. If they end up not going to school, there's a new rule that allows them to convert that to a Roth IRA. But you can only convert, but you can only convert up to the maximum. So we have a gentleman right now where he has a pretty solid amount that we are systematically converting over the next probably 7 to 10 years because it's in a covered all thing. And so, but we're going to convert it to a Roth, and it's like, all right, cool, man, that's what's going to happen here. And so there's different ways to like get access to funds. But one thing I've been curious about, and I know the way that I answer this question, but I want to hear what you say. So if someone has a UTMA, and let's say their kid turns into like a little shithead, right? And they're like, hey, I don't want this child getting this money at age 21 now, like maybe, but it's before they're 21. Maybe the kid's 19, 20 years old, and the parents are like, this kid's on a bad path, or getting this money will be hurtful to them. What are the options there?
I have a case right now where we actually had to go, and I've had this happen a couple times where I don't know if this is the only option, but an extreme option is going to the court and getting a court order, which I could see, especially in a situation of maybe not the kid's a little shit, but maybe the kid has a disability. And now that child cannot get those funds at age 21, or else it's going to impact their, public assistance. So if they end up getting social security disability or like Medicaid, medical coverage, then maybe when they turn 21, they get that account balance will severely impact them. And where we might have to go to a court and say, actually we need to maybe put this, into what we call a supplemental needs trust for that child's benefit which is a very special type of trust that kind of works within the boundaries of what is permissible for expenses that can be paid, so that a person can still qualify for those public assistance. So that might be where you might have to go to court, to change that. I don't know. I don't think you can. I don't know off the top of my head, but I would have concerns that you could change that UTMA account, like maybe change the beneficiary or change the minor child. I don't think you can.
You can't do that.
It hits their books.
Exactly. So I don't think you can. So it's like there's definitely pros and cons of all these different types of accounts.
Could you use the funds in a UTMA? And I'm just thinking outside. Could you use it to set up a trust and then put the funds into a trust?
That's an idea.
For the benefit of the child right now. Like, hey, this is what's going on. As the custodian, they're not 21. I get to make decisions based on what's best. I am going to use these funds to establish a trust, and then I'm going to put these funds in that trust for their benefit.
I think there'd be some risks of that just because that is like that child's money, and so that they have rights to. And so I think if somebody did that, that child could maybe come back and say, you couldn't do that or something. You have to go to court.
Prove that it was for the benefit of the child.
Yeah.
That's something I'll talk to parents about too, is that like at the end of the day, if the child wants to go after you for that, that means they have to take you to court. That means they have to sue you. They have to do all this stuff. Yep. So you're probably going to be
What's
okay.
What's your risk? Yeah. I live on, right.
Take me to court. I'm ready. Let's go. Yeah.
We're always telling, I always feel like I'm the bearer of bad news for people, but my job is to prepare you for worst case scenario. Yep. So yes, I agree with you. That's like worst case scenario is like, it's like, oh yeah, kiddo, you're going to have to sue your parents, to get that money. And are they actually going to do that? I don't know.
Probably. Just kidding. Don't take me to court, kids.
Yeah.
Especially my daughter. Gosh, she's just, I love you, Addie, but man, lately, you're making it hard for me.
Don't give any ideas.
Yeah.
How old is she?
She's 16, going on 20. Oh my gosh. Yeah. She's just too smart for herself. And she just, she's very stubborn, very I'm going to do what I want to do. And it's I understand because my wife gets frustrated with me too. And that I think that, and I don't mean to do this, but I am a naturally domineering person. Like I take control. Like I very much like, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And like, it's just the way that I operate, and I'm aware of it, and I'm not trying to like step on people's toes, but it's kind of the way I do things. And like Josie probably sees it with work, and like, but I think that's why I'm good at my job too, because like I think when people come to see someone like me or someone like you, they want someone to be like, tell me what to do. Tell me how to make this right.
Yeah, we had a gentleman come in yesterday, and it was like, you always ask the same question of like, what's your best case scenario when you're looking to work with a financial advisor? And he's like, I don't want to deal with all this, but I want to be able to trust whoever is dealing with all this. And so when you're talking to someone, you don't want someone who isn't strong in what they believe in, but also isn't able to learn as well. And I think that you're a good middle to where it's like, okay, if I'm wrong, like just tell me I'm wrong and we'll look 100%. Into it, and that's completely fine. But I'm very confident in what I believe in, and I'm confident that I can tell you that.
And that's, you know, and so with that being the case, like I know my daughter doesn't like it when I say things that she knows is right, but she doesn't want it to be right. And so she like will fight me just to fight me, you know? And so, and I was talking.
She sounds like me.
Yeah.
It's a very normal thing.
It's a very normal
I
teenager.
imagine too for my wife though, as well, is because like something I'm learning, I have gotten better and I am getting better. But I know I've still got a long ways to go, is that I was talking to another friend of mine and like putting myself on blast. I think that, it's going to sound weird, all right? But like, and I know my wife watches when I clip these, so all right, she's going to see this. But like sometimes I wonder if like, man, being married to me, I feel like would be like being in the nicest prison ever, you know? Like,
that's so funny.
I'm not going to clip this. I'm just going to let that one go. But here's why I say that. We live an amazing life. We like, when you talk about work hard, play hard, like I'm the guy who I wake up.
But she could leave.
She could. I mean,
maybe again, don't clip that. But like, I don't know if a prison is the right word.
Yeah, I don't know. Prison might be too strong of a word.
Because I'm like, she can leave.
Yeah, she's not like I'm not holding her captive.
It's protected.
Maybe what I mean by what I was trying to say is that like I feel like I take control of like everything, and like this is the way we're gonna do it, and like. And don't get me wrong, my wife 100% has an input, and she's very involved in like things. But I could see where she gets frustrated with me, because like. If I was working with someone like me, I'd be like, bro, chill out. I got this too, you know, like I'm an adult as well, you know? So it's like, all right, I got to pay attention to that. So yeah, I'm just going to not clip any of this stuff right here. If they want to watch the long form, you can get behind the scene. So going back to trust, I do want to talk a little bit more about this, because trusts are something that I know probably one of the most common questions that clients will ask about is just trust, their use, and you know, there's so many different things you can do with trust. And I mean, like even to the point, like every 401k document that we do, like that's a trust. Like there's so much that goes into stuff. And so, you know, maybe if you wouldn't mind just kind of explaining, let's start with basic trust, like revocable versus irrevocable, and just kind of some of the simple stuff that you see. And then maybe we can get into a little bit more of like, let's see where that goes. And because I would like to hear your thoughts on this, and how often when you're doing estate planning, you're incorporating trust, because there's challenges with trust as well. You have to move assets in and out of trust. You have to, if you don't do it right, you can actually mess things up. And so like, let's talk about trust. Let's just kick it off there.
And also, sorry, like really quick too, when we're talking about trust, I'm just curious, what's the order of priority? Because we were talking about like a beneficiary supersedes a living will, or is that right?
A will, yeah.
Yeah, a will. And so what's the order of priority when you're going through that court process of these different documents?
Okay. Yep. Okay. So let's see. So starting from basics, you know, we talked about how a trust is a non-probate tool. So it doesn't require that you're setting up a trust because you're trying to avoid a probate process for the most part. And we call that a standalone trust. Sometimes you might have a testamentary trust, which oftentimes is things like a children's trust, where we're carving out some terms in your will to say, you know, oh, if I die, I want this trust created. So we call that a testamentary trust. But a standalone trust we call that it's a non-probate tool to try to avoid probate. And the goal is to put all of your assets into this trust, and so that we can avoid that probate process, and you've got a trustee in place when you pass that will administer the trust according to its terms and distribute the property. And that generally is a revocable trust, which is probably 95% of the trusts I'm setting up are revocable trusts. And what that means is that you can revoke it. You can amend it during your lifetime, make any changes that you decide to down the road as your life changes. So trust is a great tool tool to, number one, avoid probate, streamline administration, and also just make it easy to make changes to as your life changes. So, kind of what we talked about, you got your snapshot in time where you got minor kids, your estate planning at that point is different than what it's going to be when those kids are 40 years old, and you're now looking at your end of life care decision. So it's just
You're 40 years old?
No, I meant like your kids.
I'm looking at my end of life.
That makes sense to me.
No, the kids are 40. You're like,
okay.
I don't know what
She's
you mean.
Josie's over here is like, Rob.
I thought you were retiring like tomorrow. I thought I was getting like.
You're like, Rob, you're
she's
about
like,
to die.
Come on.
Yeah.
I thought we were near death.
Jeez. It's like, I'm waiting for you to die so I can, oh my gosh, take all your
After
clients.
last week, and I thought that you were like, I'm
Yeah.
40 years older.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Sorry, anyways.
No, I meant, so just really like when you have minor kids versus when your kids are 40, not you.
Okay.
And you're like 70,
Yeah.
like very different estate planning you need at that time. So a trust is a document that can kind of like build with you during your lifetime, and especially a revocable trust because you can make changes to it. An irrevocable trust just means you can't change it. You're putting these assets into it. It's now its own like taxable entity. You got to pay, if it's got income, you now have to pay, trust tax on that, or it gets pushed out to the beneficiary. Probably is a little bit more complicated than we need to get into, but some reasons why you might do some irrevocable trusts is maybe some estate tax planning. And it's generally the one that I probably most commonly do is, because like I said, I don't do them very often, but where someone is potentially going to have, a taxable estate. And what that means is that you expect when you pass away, you're going to have over $15 million when you die, which is the estate tax limit for 2026. And that amount is probably, it should increase. The federal legislature has been messing with that over the last couple of years. So right now that's what it is, $50 million per person. So if you're married, you got $30 million. Now, realistically, most people that's not usually a concern, but you'd be surprised how many people we see that actually, if you're even over like 15 million or close to 15 million, we're going to start looking at that and going, okay, are there things that we need to do to just try and, minimize your estate tax, or just trying to plan for that? And so one tool that I'll do for some folks is do an irrevocable trust for their kids where we can start gifting funds to it. So up to that maximum amount of the gift exemption, which is $19,000 per year. Again, that number will increase for inflation. That's what it is for 2026. And so we'll actually set up a trust. It's called a crummy trust. Mm-hmm. And you gift money to it every year. The kid technically has a right to withdraw the funds. You have to give them notice. There's a lot of requirements for it, but it's just a good tool to, if you're at that point where I typically am advising clients where they have a taxable estate to go, how can we start moving some stuff out of your estate so that we can try to avoid having to, for you to have a taxable estate. And that's not to say that, you shouldn't be paying, that estate tax, but it's also just really expensive and a really onerous process to have to file an estate tax return, and just things that your family would have to deal with that maybe we could avoid with some good planning.
Well, I don't know if you've seen what's happening in New York, where they're talking about changing, they're dropping the limits from, I think it was like $7.5 million to, if you have an estate under that, then you're not being taxed, versus now they're talking about dropping it to everything over $750,000 being subject to
everything.
Yeah. So if you own a house, and so again, I think that trusts are going to become so much more prevalent, because like you start looking at stuff like that where different states, and God bless America, live where you want to live, do what you want to do.
Yeah, but that might impact. And what you're talking about is probably the New York State inheritance tax, which is, so every state can impose their own inheritance tax. Montana doesn't have one, so we don't have any inheritance tax here. So we're only worried about the federal for our like Montana residents. But yeah, I think that is definitely a factor. And also just a really good point point as well is wherever you're living, the estate planning is going to be totally different. For example, states like Washington and California are community property states. And so that means for the most part, if you go see an estate planning attorney there, they're not even going to give you the option of not doing a trust. They're going to tell you you have to do a trust, and that's to plan for your community property versus your separate property when you get married.
Could you explain that? I'm not very familiar with that.
Yeah, so let's see, in community property states, which Montana is not, but in states like California and Washington, where that's where I kind of interact with it the most, is when you get married, it's like a snapshot in time of like your separate property versus your community property, or like your marital property that you guys, that spouses collect together, and you can treat them separately. So you can maintain like your separate property and have like your own beneficiaries and decisions over that separate property versus your marital property. So for example, you might come into the marriage with your own like retirement account. That's your separate property versus, you and your spouse go buy a house together and you put it jointly in both of your names. That's now community property. So for estate planning purposes, those practitioners in those states will look at trying to maintain that separation so that you just have more flexibility. I'm sure there's way more to it that I'm just not familiar with since I don't practice in those states. But in Montana, by contrast, since we're not a community property state, when you get married, your assets all, whether you had them before the marriage or during the marriage, all just kind of become like an equitable marital estate. Right. So there isn't a separation between, like your separate property and your community spousal property, unless you do things like a premarital agreement where you're saying, I'm going to keep this as my separate property.
Yeah, I saw that because like, my ex-wife, when I was kind of surprised that, because what I've learned, and please correct me because, we all repeat things that we've heard and learned and, but I'm not an attorney, but like Montana being a no fault state is where essentially like for when we went through our divorce, I was very surprised to learn that like we split everything 50-50, like debt that like from her going back to school, just all different stuff and like every account. And so it was very much like, it was 50-50 unless you want to negotiate something else, besides that. And I was like, oh, crud, I didn't realize, and so that was part of it. It's like she had gone back to school and there was some additional debt. I was like, I didn't get anything from that. Like, crap, I wish, all right, but then again, it's like we worked it out. And so it kind of all came together. But like, that was very surprising to me. And I guess it almost seems like California and Washington, I'm sure there's things that come into it that are different. But it's like, yeah, I could see how people would be like, oh, like I'm working with a young lady right now. Who I'm getting ready to finalize her stuff this afternoon, where her family, again, try to give as little details as possible, but they sold a business and sold this business for $200+ million, like real money. And grandfather gave this money, basically set up trust and everything for all his grandchildren, all his kids, because he passed away a while ago. And so she's one of 15 cousins who's inherited, over a 7-figure plus account. And she's got other stuff that's been set up, but she's getting ready to get married, towards the end of this year. And so one of the things that I was talking to her about just as we do our recommendations, because when we do our financial plans, we will go in, it covers everything to the point where it's like it literally will go through and it will pull someone's situation. And again, all the disclaimers are there, of course, but it will be like, hey, we are not attorneys, but you probably should talk to an attorney about a prenuptial agreement, And so it brings that up. And it's just so that when they go out and they talk to an attorney, they're like, these are some of the things my financial advisor said I might want to bring up to you. So that way they're walking in and having a little bit of an idea. Because again, it's just like, that's what makes me nervous is they're young. She's in her 20s still. And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, I know everything's happy-go-lucky right now and everything feels great, but you got some real money here. So maybe we plan a little for this in case things don't work out. And I know no one likes to think about that, but hey, 50+% of marriages end in divorce these days. So maybe protect yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and also I remember when I was dating somebody pretty seriously, and I'm not going to go into details on who he was and everything like that. But he had a business with his brother. And so they were splitting everything like that. And so he brought up to me, if we do get married, there will be a prenup. And so something like that. And I remember being like, ooh, I don't really like that because I just didn't like the idea of getting divorced. But it wasn't like a prenup isn't preparing you for a divorce. It's just, I I can't remember the term that he used, but anyways, the way that he explained it was like, this business is mine and my brother's, and like, if something happens, like that can all go down the drain as well. And so there's so many things like that where people get into businesses with each other and partnerships with each other when things aren't written out. Something so, crazy can happen and feelings can get hurt, and you just never want that to be the case. And you want it to be just completely unbiased and have somebody unbiased in there to where even now, like my brother-in-law is currently just actually previously went through like a business, I guess, divorce or something like that, to where he had agreements with his brother and stuff like that. And because they weren't written down, because they just agreed to trust each other. And it's not like neither one of them were in the wrong. Like, they both had every right to trust each other. But at the end of the day, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. It's like an operating agreement for a business,
Yes.
where you're going into business with a partner and
it's like, at that point, you get to decide too, instead of the state.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Why wouldn't you want that choice?
Yeah. And really the whole goal of doing an operating agreement is to, if you guys disagree, here's how we're going to resolve these, so that we don't have to go to court and we don't have to look to Montana law of how we're going to do it. We have already agreed on these terms. And I as much as I hate to say like a premarital agreement's similar, but it is, it's a transaction where you're going, okay, if we do separate, or when I die, that's also part of it. We are agreeing now, this is how we're going to separate our assets. And it's a good tool. I totally agree that I think most people's reaction to a premarital agreement is quite negative, just because it's just got a negative
connotation.
Absolutely. Yeah. It makes you feel icky and feel like you don't trust each other. And that's not really, if people can get past that, I think it's a really great tool for protecting your business interests, but also maybe like family inheritance. That's been coming up a lot lately, where parents are going like, can I force my kid to like do a premarital agreement before they get their inheritance? And the answer is yes. You could potentially do that through a trust, and I've done that a couple of times, which of course those parents are looking at going, I'm not trying to force my kids to do anything, but oftentimes like these parents they might have their own partnerships, in real estate or in businesses that, when they die and it goes to their kids, that if their kids' spouses, they end up getting a divorce from their spouse, could impact these inherited partnerships. And so it is a tool that I have used that, with a lot of communication with the kids and their spouses and explaining, here's why, we're asking you to do that. And you can't force, that's like a protected right? You can't force someone to get married. You can't force someone to, sign a contract like that, but we can hold funds in trust until they do it, or say, it's going to be held in trust, until you do it or you're divorced. So it's just some protection for those assets. Very isolated situations where I've done that, just because it is, a very difficult thing for those kids to navigate.
I think that's honestly, like you saying, I've never thought about that. That to me seems like an easy out, honestly, like from as a kid, because I'm thinking like, okay, you inherit some money and then mom or dad comes to you and it's like, hey, just so you know, you don't get this money and until you sign this agreement if you're going to get married. Like, that's a part of this. It's like, oh, okay, cool. So it's like now going to the person you're talking to, it's like, hey, just so you know, we have to sign this or I don't have this money. It's like, oh, okay, cool. But yeah, I think with a prenup, it is one of those things where the connotation, what it represents to people is like, oh, negative. But I think a lot of times people miss like, well, what if you change your mind? Like, what if you get tired of me? What if you want to leave me? Like what if you cheat on me? We don't know what the future holds. And that's the thing is that like, I think it's really, I saw this with COVID, and God bless America. Believe whatever you want to believe. I don't care. However, I saw families. I know of 2 different couples that got divorced over the way they saw COVID.
No.
One of them was a neighbor of mine, and him and his wife had completely different views, where he was like, I'm not doing this, our kids aren't doing this, and his wife was like, we have to do this, this is the way. And again, the political climate, this is not a surprise in America today. Like, it's very, very divided right now. It is very like, hey, we get, people see it all this way or all that way. At least that's how it's the perception. I don't really think, like, I talk with people on both sides. I have people on both extremes of the political aisle, and I see like, hey, everyone pretty much wants the same things. Like they want like their family to be taken care of. They want to have like a good quality of life. They just have different ideas of how to get there. But like things like that happen, and it's just like, okay, well, maybe something like that comes along in the future. No one saw COVID coming, and it definitely changed the way that people looked at how they were doing things. And so like I have another client who he's, separating, him and his wife are splitting up, and a lot of it had to do with just the way they view the world. And he doesn't want to be in America, and God bless America. You can leave, dude. That's cool. And he's a nice person, but it's just like, they've been married for a long, long time. And I think for us to think we know what the next 5 years, 10 years, 30 years from now is going to look like, where we're going to be, the people we're going to be, it's just kind of, it's silly, and things change, so I'm not, I don't know. I don't see a prenup as a bad thing for people who have who have assets they want to protect, not even significant, but like they want to protect something.
Yeah.
And
cool.
at least you're getting
tool.
the choice instead of the state. And I think that's like just the biggest thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've covered a lot. So I guess with you've talked a little bit, and maybe we can kind of wrap things up with like, I have probably the biggest thing that I find with clients that we're working with are a huge amount of my clients are looking for ways to mitigate taxes. And that's something that we'll bring up. And again, our planning software will bring up ideas for them to talk to their attorneys about and what they could be doing to help mitigate some of that. I know you were going into some of that with like using your revocable trust. Again, for people out there who maybe are in a spot, we have a lot of people who come into money, it's not a surprise. So it's never like, oh, I had a rich uncle who died and I had no idea. Like they know it's coming, but like a lot of the clients that we're working with come into some sizable assets, but then it's not like they grew up with it. And so they're not used to having this kind of money. And then they don't really know what they should be doing from a tax planning standpoint to protect those assets long-term. What would you say to some of those people? And like, what are some of the tools that you're using most, or like some of the ways you're using like some of those irrevocable trusts and how that helps?
Yeah. Let's see. So like, I don't know where to start.
It's a big question.
Yeah. Because I think really typically I'm not using irrevocable trust unless you're at that $15 million, like limit or a maximum amount right now for estate tax purposes. And that's really where it triggers, like I after having a conversation with someone looking at their assets and they're telling me what they have. And then I go, okay, we got to do maybe some more planning and maybe some more, just trying to mitigate those estate taxes. So from that perspective, there might be some trust terms that we could throw in or types of trust that we can do to try to minimize what estate taxes you might have. And I was wondering if you meant from like an income tax situation as well, just because I typically don't advise too much on that, where I'm going, go talk to your financial advisor, go talk to your accountant, I think too, what I was kind of getting at, and I don't know how much the rules have changed, but I know like I've seen people who are using irrevocable trust to make sure they qualify for like federal benefits down the road. Oh yeah, yes, yep. That is a different type of trust, which we would typically call like a Medicaid trust, which is a type of irrevocable trust where you are transferring all of your assets into it to try to qualify for public assistance. Generally, you're doing this for Medicaid and long-term care planning, and it's a very restrictive trust. You be like the beneficiary of that trust, but you can't be the trustee of it, which means that you aren't in charge of your own money or your house anymore. You got to put somebody else, like your kid or like an institution, financial institution
like
or organization. Yep. Okay. A corporate trustee or like a nonprofit organization as a trustee, and they have very strict terms of what they can give you. It's also subject to a lookback period. So in Montana, it's 5 years. So if you make the transfer to try to qualify for Medicaid within, and you have a 5-year period where you can make these transfers and cannot get on this public assistance. And if you try to, apply for Medicaid during that period, you will be disqualified because you have these assets that you transferred within this 5-year window. I don't do these trusts.
Yeah.
I've maybe done one or two in my career, but in very isolated situations. And there are practitioners who do. So if there is, someone who's interested, there are definitely attorneys even here in Missoula that do that.
Stephen Colas does that over at Elder Law or something.
Yep. I think it's Montana Elder Law.
I haven't talked to Stephen in a minute, but I know he's talked
and that's very specialized what they do, and they're very good at it. Where I feel I don't have that expertise, and I also have had concerns about, I can't guarantee that's going to work because Montana law could change at any time to try to change how those trusts work, and I am just not doing them enough to keep up on those rules, and so I just don't feel comfortable with it. So if someone's ever looking for that, and after I talk to them and they're going, no, I really do want to do that, I'm going, okay, then I'm probably not the right attorney for you, because it's just not in my expertise. But
I'd be curious to see with the corporate trustees if you assign like what's allowed versus the standard, because I see with most of the trusts what we see, this is hard for our clients to understand sometimes, is like if someone puts money in a trust, it's not that they don't trust that you're going to do the right things, but they want to protect that you do. And so I have one client right now who he has a trust. We have a corporate trustee assigned to it. And I had to have conversations with the corporate trustee, and I was like, tell him no. Tell him no, because he's going through these assets like it's going out of style. And that is not the intent that the person who put this trust together, that's not what they wanted to have happen here. There we go. All right. So they'll edit that back. But yeah, so again, with these corporate trustees, I would be curious to see in those Medicaid trusts, if you can assign a corporate trustee and what is allowed with those assets, if it's the basic, health and welfare and living and all that stuff.
And it's usually the opposite, right? Because your public assistance should be covering, the whole point of those is that it is supposed to be covering your daily, living. So it should be covering where you're living, and your food and shelter. And really what the trust can cover, is your other expenses. And I might be confusing that with the supplemental needs trust as well. So I don't know off the top of my head, but generally it's very, very restricted of what expenses that these trusts can pay for, especially when they are on those Medicaid benefits. Because otherwise, if the trustee is paying for things that Medicaid, federal and state law says, that this trustee can't pay for, it could completely unwind the trust. Again, another reason why I'm like, oh, these are just so strict and complicated that they make me very nervous.
It's a very niche thing. It's when I talked about financial advisors, when it comes to employer sponsored plans, we do a lot of 401ks, totally comfortable with it. What I don't do any ESOPs, because it's a whole nother beast. And I'll use the analogy of it's the difference between a dentist and an orthodontist. All right. Every orthodontist is a dentist, but not every dentist is an orthodontist.
That's a really good way of looking at it.
That's how financial advising works, especially when it comes to employer sponsored plans, 401ks. It's so funny to me because I run across it all the time. Financial advisors will stumble into 401ks, and it just happens. You work with a small business owner. Oh, I want to set up a 401k because you have the licenses. You can set it up.
You can do it.
But they don't understand ERISA law. ERISA law is this 538-page document written in, single-space legalese that is very, very clear about what you can and can't do with these trusts. And so a lot of advisors will go in and they'll make decisions that I'm like, oh my God. People don't realize the DOL is auditing these things, and it's a lot like tax returns. You don't get audited a lot, but it's over 70% of plans that get audited have some type of corrective action. Yeah. So it's usually a financial thing. And what people miss is what happens, especially if you're using the wrong share classes, and not to go down a weird rabbit hole, but they can come back retroactively at what it cost all of your participants, and it just gets so crazy expensive. But I feel like what you're talking about now,
it's very similar to the concerns that you have is my concerns over those types of trusts where something could go wrong and could really hurt somebody. So I'm like, go to someone who does those more than I do.
You mentioned supplemental needs trust. Are those the same as a special needs trust? Or is it,
yes. Okay. Yep. Just a change in the what the law calls it, trying to get away from the word of special needs and more of supplemental, because that's the idea, is it's supposed to supplement your benefits. But
I didn't
same
know.
thing.
Maybe I'm out of tune. I've never heard anyone say anything but a special needs trust.
Very common.
Okay. But you had mentioned it a couple of times, and again, working with people where I've seen that, just and kind of how those kick in. And those are really powerful. I have, it's tough. They didn't end up working with us. I don't know if they ended up doing anything, but I had someone who had contacted our office last year where one of their children was getting this medication that was costing them $20,000 every 3 weeks. And
Yikes.
the husband was inheriting a couple $100,000. And so it was going to disqualify them from being able to get this covered by Medicaid. And so he was looking for ways to do this, but because there was something weird, and I referred him to a couple of different attorneys. I was like, man, you got to talk to someone, but something with the way that they didn't know if the medicine was actually what was keeping the child better, because it was having less and less, positive effects, and they couldn't get the child to be designated as having a special need. And so the special needs trust was not an option. And so I don't know. I always wonder about that guy. I'm like, I wonder what happened with that, because there was something where he's like, it's backwards because I'm going to inherit this money. We're going to blow through this entire life
on this medication
Just
over
to
the
get
next
back on
year,
Medicaid.
just to get back on Medicaid, And I was like, man, I hope it worked out for him. So, but yeah, just again, the world's, it's hard because we're always looking for creative solutions, and sometimes they're just, it's just not there. But we've covered a lot. I think I've been going for an hour and a half almost, probably longer.
You know what I was just thinking? I don't think I answered Josie's question about, what's the order of priority, right? That would probably be a good thing to circle back on. So I think order priority number one to me is I think everybody should have a power of attorney. When you turn 18, you should have a power of attorney. I actually just notarized so estate planning clients and good friends of ours that they were working through their estate planning and just mentioned, it's like, what about my kids? Should they have a power of attorney? They're, one's 18, one is, I think, 21. And I'm going, yeah, they probably should, so that you as a parents can still, maybe help them, with things even education stuff. If they have a power of attorney now, when a child turns 18, they're going to college. You can't call financial aid at at the university and go, hey, I want to look at, I want to pay this bill. How much do I owe? They're not going to tell you generally without the child's or the student's permission. A power of attorney, we can cover that in a power of attorney. And so I just actually notarized for, I think he's maybe 19 yesterday for a power of attorney. So his parents could, act for him. So, really that is, I think everybody should have one for once you're an adult.
Can I ask before we go further? So, and correct me, just the process for getting a power of attorney would be meeting with someone, having a document drawn up, and then getting it notarized with 2 witnesses. Is that right?
Yes. So it does require probably a notary at minimum. Sometimes I'll have witnesses on there. I generally do that when we have, other estate planning documents where it does require witnesses. So I'm like, well, we're already witnessing these ones. Let's witness power of attorney because it just strengthens it. But I don't think it's required. Actually, I know it's not required. There are some limited powers in a power of attorney where technically you're supposed to have witnesses on it, but it's not necessary though. So
then going back, I know you were answering Josie's question.
So number one, power of attorney, most important. Then probably next would be, I would also put in a living will declaration. If that's really important to you, your end of life care decisions, and you don't want to be on, hooked up to life sustaining ventilators and, stuck in life sustaining treatment, then, and it directs, your doctor, your agent to withdraw that life-sustaining treatment. I think that's a really important document. So you have your wishes and in writing of what you want. So I would kind of couple those two together. Then your will is looking at your will. And really that's a broader discussion of, do I need a trust? Are we doing a trust and a will? Which typically if we're doing a trust, we're still doing a will. It's really I always call it your backup plan to your trust. So if for whatever reason, something is not properly transferred into your trust upon your death, then we still at least have a will that directs where those assets go into your trust. We call it a pour over will. But that's what I'd say for most people. Look at, if you're going to accomplish one thing, do a power of attorney, which you're saying, Robert, yes, you can meet with an attorney, kind of talk through. There's so many things with the power of attorney we probably just don't have time to talk about today, but the different types of powers, whether it's durable or springing, So just kind of getting advice on what
was that
is
second word?
springing. So durable or springing. So durable means that it's effective upon signature. It's not contingent upon you being incapacitated, versus a springing power of attorney means that it's not even going to take effect until someone declares that you cannot make decisions for yourself.
Is that just, I've heard different things on that. It's just a medical professional. Who can declare that?
Depends on the terms in the document. But typically most people try to put in there to say that it would be a doctor or maybe two doctors that would have to write a letter. I don't do them. I don't think I've ever done a springing one for this exact reason, because the question is, who makes that determination? And I think technically under Montana law, it has to be the court. The court in a guardianship says and declares someone as incapacitated. And I don't know of many doctors who are willing to say that, for concerns of their own, probably their own liability, but also they're not going to do that on an isolated one meeting with a person and say, this person's incapacitated. Yep, this power of attorney agent can now act.
What would be for the durable then? So I guess my playing devil's advocate on that, if it goes into effect upon signature, that's kind of a bigger deal. I mean, isn't it? Because
absolutely. Yep.
What if because I have my mom is set up as one of my power of attorneys, my wife, and so both, and I think my dad, I think all of them are listed as like people who can make decisions if I can't,
Yeah.
And so with that said, I'm pretty sure mine's springing though, because I'm pretty sure it says where they have to have like a medical professional say that Robert can't make decisions for himself.
Yeah.
But what would for me, and I'm not really worried because I trust my mom, I trust my dad, I trust my wife. But what if someone was like, hey, I want my mom to be able to do this for me, but I don't want her to have access to my finances or access to this or access to that. How do you limit that then if you're recommending a durable versus the springing?
Yes. So I think you're starting off with the question you have to ask yourself is who do you trust for this role? Because you're putting a lot of power into someone's hands to be able to, get to make decisions, particularly financial decisions, right? Because you could, your mom could go down to the bank and with your power of attorney and get access to your accounts. So it is really important. I don't see that so much as a concern with healthcare decisions, though, really, because your doctor's going to communicate just with you. But at least your agent would have authority, to call and confirm medical appointments, get access to records, help make decisions. But really, you're still in charge of your own medical decisions till you can't. But the financial piece, very concerning, and making sure. So number one, it's someone that you really trust. And we could always limit it. So you can always do limited powers of attorney. So if there's just something isolated that, you wanted your mom and dad to be able to do, but maybe not everything, you can do a limited power of attorney. But it does cause a lot of, a lot of stop and reflect for a lot of clients to go, oh, this is durable, and I need to really think about who is the appropriate person to be my agent. I think it's usually for most people, if you're married and your spouse is going to be your agent, for most people, I would say it's a very easy decision where they're going, yeah, of course, my spouse probably already has access to everything, so this is not a big deal. But then when you're thinking about if it's not that, then it's do you trust your kids? Do you trust your kids to do that? Do you trust your very good friend, your parent to do that? And it definitely causes, some pause for some people. I'd say probably most people still end up signing one, but keep in mind, it's a revocable document. So you can always revoke it. And that person is subject to fiduciary duties. They are acting in a fiduciary relationship. And if they were to ever do something that is not in your best interest or not at your direction, they could be held in a lot of trouble. And that's really where you see things like adult protective services, undue influence, concerns and stuff, where we look at that and go, okay, maybe there's some intervention that needs to happen.
That makes a lot of sense, because I've seen on some of the docs that we've had people do where it asks if they want to waive the corporate bond requirements or the bonding requirements, I think, for when they're doing their estate planning. And so I guess that makes more sense. I didn't realize that they were acting in the capacity of a fiduciary. And so very similar again with 401k plans, where it has to have, those plans have to be bonded for that exact reason. If someone fails to meet their fiduciary obligations, or they do something that causes the assets to cause them to lose it, then it's okay, well now we have that fidelity bond. So that makes more sense now. Yeah.
Typically, so all of those roles that we've talked about, personal representative of your will, trustee of your trust, agent under a power of attorney or in there, which gets really confusing because every document has like a different term for what you're calling people in it, but they're all fiduciary roles, you know, that require, you know, adherence to, you know, like what's in the best interest of the person that you're acting for.
Nice. Yeah. I did not realize that. Well, shoot, I feel like we covered a ton, and I have learned a ton on this. Yeah. This has been really
Oh my
good.
gosh. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface of like, of all the things that we could talk about. There's things on my list here we didn't even,
let's go. We can keep going.
Oh my gosh.
What do you want to talk about? Yeah.
Let's see. We kind of touched on like the undue influence, which is just something I'm seeing a lot of, and you might even see it in your career, and if you haven't, you will. You know, where someone it seems like someone's kind of taken advantage of somebody, you know, and that's where you kind of see it in these power of attorney roles, where maybe they're starting to do things that just don't seem right, or your client is starting to maybe, you know, go, it's like, well, this is what so and so wants me to do, and it just raises some concerns, and I feel like I'm seeing that a lot. It's a big part of my practice is you know, when you know, the changes like you were mentioning where maybe someone, you know, or a situation where there's a will that says everything goes to my kids, and he wrote that out, but then he put his girlfriend as like the beneficiary, and then that leads me to questions of going, oh, what was, you know, was he influenced to make that decision?
That's the case she was trying to make.
So hard. Yeah, really, really, really hard. I get calls like that all the time, and very rarely, you know, are they usually ones where I'm going, yeah, you got a case here.
So to interrupt, I mean, again, I have to be careful because there's no way that someone would circle back, but like that was the case this woman was trying to make because the father unfortunately ended up taking his own life.
Oh.
So, yes. And so the thought process towards it was that towards the end, when he made these changes, it was within a very short period of time of when he took his own life. And so her whole thing was like, he wasn't in his right mind. This is not what he wanted. He left a written note when he was like, because what he did is he basically went through all of his accounts and he wrote out the account number in his own handwriting. This was not in the state of Montana. This was in California. And he wrote it all out. I want this to go to my daughter, everything. And so that's what he did before taking his life. And then that's what they found when they showed up. But he had changed very recently the beneficiary designation on one of his accounts.
Yeah, and so he probably thought writing it out like that would be enough, and it just wasn't.
Exactly.
Oh, that is a tough one.
It was a very tough challenge, and it was something that, again, we spent years trying to get. You know, and I say we, like I was part of it because we were handling the investments for everything she did yet. And I would, you know, I got her, you know, plugged up with some attorneys in California and all that, but like, it just ended up not working out. And that the thing was crazy is that the girlfriend, she didn't even know she was getting these assets. So she had no idea.
Really?
So she didn't claim them. And so that was the thing, is that she was trying to get these assets because she was trying to make her case of like, this was not what was supposed to happen. And I agree with her. I think she's 100% right. But again, it's kind of like, it's not what you know, what you can prove, you know, and this is what the beneficiary designation says. And so she ended up not getting them. And it was really, really challenging. And it was a sizable, like it was a lot of money, you know, so it was just kind of shitty. But
is there a way that you can like, I guess, shut that down? Like, if you think somebody's incompetent to change their will, say you have like an 80-year-old or an 85-year-old that's like, I guess I just want to change my will right now. Is there a way you could be like, no?
Yeah.
You can't do that. I don't know.
Yes.
Your dad's going to watch this and be like, what is Josie
He's not 80 yet, but like just for reference.
So
he's 40, so he's like close to death.
Yeah. Your dad is not 40.
Super.
Your dad's older than me.
Old. He's way past death age, you know?
Sorry, Patrick.
So the most extreme way to address that is through a guardianship or conservatorship action where you have like concerns that someone is doing something that they don't have capacity to do. And even if you're a power of attorney for someone, that doesn't forestall you from getting, you know, what we call the principle, to not act, to be like, no, you can't do that. And so situations that have come up where we've had to do that would be things like, had a guy who was donating substantial amounts of money to I don't know what, he was donating to something. He was giving his money away. And he didn't have that money, to be giving away when he needed it for his care. And his kids are his powers of attorney, and they're going, Dad, like, you can't do that. I know you want to like help, like, let us help you. And he's like, no, I'm going to give this money. And we made the decision, to pursue a guardianship and conservatorship action just so, they could, stop that. So it's like, that's like almost like the most like probably innocent example, versus a like maybe a more serious one is where someone is, taking very serious advantage and like taking all the money out of these accounts and using it for personal use, and where we have to go to a court and go, no, this person's literally stealing money.
I had that happen as well. I had, again, I apologize. I try not to interrupt, but it's just
You're
like,
good. Yeah.
I'm thinking I have a client where at the same time she had her son she was she's still alive. She's in her 70s. And her son is, a grown man, like in his mid 40s, and just refused to work. But then she didn't have a lot of money. And so he was like living off of her money.
Oh, yeah.
That was happening at the same time as that she met someone online who was a boyfriend, and he was supposedly like a major in the Army, and he was stationed in Texas. And like, I've been in the Army, I know how the Army works. And so she's like, oh, blah, 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 I need to get some money. And she was sending him money. And at first it wasn't a lot. It was like a couple $1,000s. I was like, okay, it's your money. God bless America. Like that's kind of my thought. It's like not my business what you want your money for. So if someone's like, Robert, I need to pull out $5,000, I never ask why. It's not my money. Like, we're stewards. God bless America. Roger that, sir. I got you. Here's your money. But so she didn't have a ton of money. She was, like only a couple $100,000, and she's living off this. And so first I was like, hey, you've got to stop giving your son money. Like, you can do whatever you want, but I think he's taking advantage of this. And the second thing was like, then she was like, oh yeah, this guy I'm dating, he's a major in the Army, but now he needs this because he can't get help with this. And I finally was like,
no.
I was like, no. That's not how the Army works. This is what would happen if this is like with the situation you're describing. He would be able to go, and there's resources in place for this. I'm like, I can't process this. I can't process this transaction for you. And I'm sorry. And I was like, I'm just going to get my fraud department involved. I know it's not what you want to hear, but this is not okay. Something is wrong here, because it went from like a couple $1,000s. Like, I think after the second one of maybe like the second one was like maybe another $1,000 or $2,000. And then it was like 10 grand. I was like, no, effing no, we're not doing this. And so I did. I got in.
Well, the government even monitors like transaction of $10,000 or more.
And again, I'm saying it was 10. Maybe it was 8. It was something where like it was like a big chunk. It was like when you only have like maybe 200 grand. And again, I'm not saying you only have, but like she didn't have a lot of money. And so like I'm looking at this like, hey, this is like 5% of your assets here you're trying to give away to some guy in Texas that's your boyfriend that you have a long distance relationship with. And I was like, and I was like, no, in my mind, it's like, you talked about, hard conversations earlier. It's like, that's a hard conversation to be like, you're being scammed. And I know it's not what you want to hear. And and again, when it happened, I was, have to be delicate, because people can move their money at any time, and we don't want them to just, oh, well, screw you, I'll go work somewhere else. Okay, God bless capitalism. However, I was like, I need to get my fraud department involved because something here is wrong. And sure enough, it was complete fraud. And I was sad because, she probably lost out on maybe $3,000, something like that. But I was thankful because like, as the advisors, we don't want to believe that like, oh, but it happens and people take advantage. And I know with my grandmother, my mom thankfully caught it. My grandma's, she has dementia. She's in a home, but she no longer has access. But going back to your question of like, how do you protect people from themselves? My mom tracks her account for her, she got a notice that $80,000 was getting moved out of her account. Jesus. And she immediately dropped everything, called the bank, drove straight there, and thank God they were able to stop it. But it's like, there's really shitty people out there who will like take advantage of that. And it's like, again, you see movies like Taken. It's like, man, I wish someone would go out and find these scammers who are doing that, because it's like, my grandma's in a home. She has nothing like, you're stealing from an old lady, and it's like, So it
terrible.
is.
And you
It
see
is.
it all the time. Yeah.
And you
and
do.
you're in a unique position as their financial advisor of that balance that you have to weigh of, it's like, it's their money. They can do whatever they want versus, it's like, oh, I have serious concerns here.
We're also acting as fiduciaries.
Exactly.
And that's what I
It's a
always
legal
come back
concern.
to. Yeah. For me, it's like, hey,
Yep.
I have a job to make sure that we are operating in your best interest. You're giving us and our team discretionary control of your assets to like trade on your behalf. So at the end of the day, if I'm wrong and this isn't fraud, cool, then it'll be caught and we move on with our lives, and I apologize. But I'm doing this to protect you at my best of my ability.
Yeah.
However, like I also look like one of our core values is stewardship. Like I understand we are stewards. It is not my money. And this is why I'm very, when it comes to the way the world works, I don't really take things personal. We never, like, it is so rare that we lose clients. It's very, very rare, but when it happens, like, I'm like, all right, God bless America. It's cool. If you want to move money somewhere else, that's fine. But I also understand, like, it's not mine. It's not my money. It's temporary. Money's going to come, money's going to go. And that's the way it works. Now, if we do a good job, and I think that, like, and from what you've been describing, I can see why you've made partner, why it's worked out, because I can tell you know your stuff and you are very passionate about this. And I think that that's something that's been helpful for us as well, is that it's like, hey, we are here to try and do the best we can. And a big thing for us is I'm always trying to give away more value than we take.
Yeah.
I never want someone to be like, oh my gosh, Robert charges us this and all this and blah, blah, blah. It's just not worth it. Like, because I've seen that. I've had clients come in, and we've talked about this in other episodes, but I've had clients come in where the advisors, through the fees they are charging, are making more money than the clients.
Oof,
it's insane.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's a lacking mentality. For me, I always look at it like, there's so much. There's more. It's like I'm listening to a book right now, and it talked about how, let's say you take an old car, and let's say you go out and you restore that old car. You've essentially created wealth. You've made something that wasn't valuable before into more value. And so, like, you didn't take anything away from anyone to do that. You just, through hard work and through effort, you created more value. And it just goes to prove it's not like a set pie if there's only this much money. It's, you can create value with anything and everything, and there's enough for everyone. And so, like, I think having that mentality, I never really stress, because I also know that, like, me personally and our team is like, I wake up, I work early. I'm constantly looking at how we can make things better. And when you look at it that way, and like, not we've arrived, but like, hey, we're going to continue to grow, and those like slight edges are going to compound over time. And as good as we are today, we're so much better than we were a few years ago. And I know we're going to only be that much better a few years from now. And so it's like, just finding ways to get better, but
Well, and like also, like, just to kind of piggyback off of that, like, because you have people who care so much about making money, it doesn't really matter how. And I was having this conversation with one of my girlfriends, just because, and the thing is, if you truly look at it and if you genuinely care about creating wealth, a lot of the things that you do, because you may not have you may not be charging as much, but you have more clients, you have better reputation, you have more people referring you. So in the long run, you may not be making a lot of money up front, but in the long run, you're going to be accumulating more wealth. And it just kind of shows up in a lot of different ways in our lives, to where I have a girlfriend that's going through this right now, to where something was said that was not true. And this other person is going around saying a lot of that stuff. And she's like, I'm not even going to defend myself. I'm not going to talk badly about them. I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm going to show through my actions who I am. And I'm like, at the end of the day, that's true, because she might be losing in the short term, but in the long game, people are going to know who she is, and people are going to defend her because they know who she is as a person. And so it's like, in every aspect of our lives, if you genuinely give away more value than you ever take, and kind of take the loss in the short term, it always works out in the long term.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been going for a while,
and
this is the first time I've been like, I think I need to stop, because I have a 1:00 appointment that I've got to get ready for still. And
I think my camera's going to die anyway. So
okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, Natalie, before we finish up, why don't we just let people know, if they wanted to connect with you, they wanted to talk about getting their estate planning documents done, or just trust or anything like that, how can someone find you? How can someone connect with you? And what does that look like?
So first of all, I want to start off by saying, like anything I've talked about today is just general information. I'm not trying to give you any legal advice, but just information about why you might want to consider doing your estate planning. And you might talk to an attorney and and they're going to tell you something entirely different. You know, we all, although there's a lot of things that are very standard in estate planning, there's a lot of variation. You're going to get different advice on what, you know, than what you're hearing, you know, on this podcast today. So just take everything I said with a grain of salt, just help you start thinking about these things. And if anyone is interested in connecting with me, you know, my name is Natalie Black. I'm at Worden Thane, and you can look us up on our website, and I'm always happy to connect with people. Kind of back to what you're saying about like the creating, how did you say it? The creating,
wealth or value. I think
value, like creating more value.
Giving away more value.
Giving away more value. I mean, it's all we're trying to do, I think, as lawyers, are help people, you know, so that's all we're trying to do. And if I can be helpful to you, give me a call.
Yeah, it goes right back. Good people doing good work.
Good people doing good work.
I love it. It's a perfect way to end it. Well, thank you so much. Josie, let people know how they can find you if they want to connect.
Yeah, so as always, it will probably be linked. My email will be linked below, but it is josie@nexuswealthmanagement.org. And then, I'm sure Robert will give you his.
Yeah, website too. You can find us, nexuswealthmanagement.org. Happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you guys for watching. And Natalie, thanks for being here. This was a great time.
Thank you.
Awesome.